I don't know if I'd even finished my coffee before the first gut punch of the day landed. We were all crammed into the conference room for the Monday morning meeting at headquarters, the kind of meeting that smells like burnt coffee and cheap carpet cleaner, where the air feels too thick for this early in the day. My laptop was open in front of me, mostly for show. I wasn't reading anything on the screen. My eyes kept drifting to the clock, counting down the minutes until I could slip back to my office and breathe. Emily, my wife, was at the head of the table, as she often was in these meetings. She's the head of HR, and over the years I'd seen her deliver tough news to employees with this uncanny mix of warmth and authority. She had that smooth, confident tone that could make bad news sound like an opportunity. I'd always admired that about her. At least, I used to. Halfway through the agenda, she cleared her throat in that way that means she's about to shift gears. Her eyes swept the room, lingering on me for just half a second. Long enough for my stomach to knot, but not long enough for anyone else to notice. "There's one more item we need to address," she said, glancing down at her notes. "Effective next month, Mark's salary will be adjusted to better reflect current market benchmarks." Adjusted. That's the word she used. The kind of bland corporate euphemism that doesn't sound too bad unless you're the one it's aimed at. But I knew exactly what she meant. Cut. Nearly in half. I didn't move, didn't even let my eyebrows twitch. "And," she continued, her voice still calm and steady, "given the company's strategic direction, we may soon need to consider a more suitable candidate for his role." There was a pause, just long enough for a few people to shift in their chairs and pretend to check their notes. No one made eye contact with me. I stared at the glass of water in front of me, as if the ripples on its surface could tell me how the hell this morning had taken such a turn. The thing is, just 2 hours earlier, I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see. It happened in our kitchen, while she was getting ready for work. Emily's phone was on the counter, screen up, while she was in the bedroom looking for her blazer. I was halfway through pouring coffee when her phone lit up with a new message. I wasn't snooping. I didn't touch it. But the words were impossible to miss. From someone named Jack. "Will we make it today?" That was it. 6 words. No context. No emojis. No punctuation beyond the question mark. But my brain immediately locked onto them, chewing them over from every angle. Will we make it? Not you. Not I, we. And today, like something had been planned. Before I could even let the thought form into something coherent, I heard her footsteps coming down the hall. She swept into the kitchen, saw her phone on the counter, and grabbed it so quickly you'd think it was about to self-destruct. She didn't meet my eyes, just said, "We need to talk about your performance lately," as if she could redirect the entire flow of my morning with a single sentence. And now here she was, sitting at the head of the table, executing that talk in front of half the company. She framed it as a strategic business decision, a result of market conditions and role realignment. She sprinkled in all the right buzzwords, making it sound like this was part of some sweeping organizational plan and not a public gutting of my professional reputation. As she spoke, I kept seeing that text in my mind like a watermark overlaying every word she said. "Will we make it today? Will we make it today?" She went on for another 5 minutes, methodically explaining the adjustments to my compensation and hinting, ever so subtly, that there might be an opportunity for a leadership change in my department. It was like watching someone expertly dismantle a bridge while smiling and telling you the road ahead would be smoother without it. When she finally moved on to the next agenda item, a few people glanced at me, quickly looking away when they saw I wasn't offering any reaction. I just nodded faintly, made a note in my notebook that said nothing but 1:30 call Dad, and waited for the meeting to end. The rest of the session blurred into background noise. I don't remember the sales projections or the marketing updates. My mind kept circling the same 2 points. The message from Jack, and the fact that Emily had just sabotaged my career with the precision of someone cutting a wire they'd measured 3 times. By the time we were wrapping up, I could feel a tightness in my chest. Not panic, not yet, but a sharp awareness that something in my life had shifted. And not in a way that could be fixed by sending a few resumes out or working harder on quarterly goals. When the meeting adjourned, people filed out quickly, eager to escape the awkwardness hanging in the air. I stayed seated for a moment, pretending to organize my papers. Emily was at the other end of the room, talking to one of the junior managers. She laughed at something he said, the sound light and easy, completely at odds with the fact that she just dismantled me in front of our colleagues. Our eyes met for a brief second as she gathered her things. Her smile didn't falter, but there was no warmth in it. Just a polite, professional curve of the lips, the kind she'd use with a vendor she barely knew. I left the room without saying a word to her. Out in the hallway, I could still hear fragments of conversation from other employees, quiet, cautious, the way people talk when they're making sure the subject of their gossip isn't within *T. I didn't need to hear the words to know who they were talking about. By the time I reached my office, my phone buzzed with a company-wide email summarizing the key points from the meeting. There it was in writing, Mark's compensation package will be adjusted, followed by the vague explanation Emily had given out loud. Reading it felt like seeing my own obituary in print. I closed the email without replying and leaned back in my chair. The day had barely started, but I already knew it wasn't going to be about work. Not really. Not anymore. There was something bigger at play here. And that message from Jack? That was my first breadcrumb. After the meeting, I didn't go straight back to my desk. I took the long loop around the atrium, past the lobby plants that never look fully alive, past the glass trophy case that still holds awards from a version of the company that doesn't exist anymore. The building hummed with that polished quiet you only notice when you've been publicly humiliated. Like the air itself is trying not to make eye contact. I kept hearing her voice. Market benchmarks? More suitable candidate. Each phrase trimmed and ironed flat so it wouldn't snag on anyone else's conscience. It should have felt random. Restructuring happens. Budgets get cut. But nothing about it felt random. Felt directed. Calculated. Personal. By the time I reached the back stairwell, the text from the morning slid back into my mind like a blade. Will we make it today? 6 words. No emoji, no fluff, just a quiet question that didn't include me. I stared at the paint chips on the stair rail and let the fragments start clicking into place. The little things I'd shrugged off, the dust I'd swept under the rug because loving someone sometimes means giving them the benefit of every doubt, even the ones that don't deserve it. It started with Fridays. Emily used to hate staying late on Fridays. She joked that the only reason to be in an office past 6 was if the building was on fire and HR had to make sure people evacuated in alphabetical order. Then, around spring, business dinners became a thing. At first they were early and forgettable. 6:30 at a mid-tier bistro with a client she swore was painfully dull. Then they crept later. 9 o'clock, 10:30, midnight. Once, 2 in the morning, and her story was that the client's flight got delayed and then conversation flowed. She came home smelling like citrus and something woodsy that wasn't her usual perfume. I remember hugging her and trying to memorize the scent so I could stop noticing it. Then there were the trainings, unannounced trips that showed up on the calendar like pop-up ads. 2-day leadership intensive in Portland. Quick compliance refresher in Denver. Oddly specific and yet impossible to verify without sounding like a jealous teenager. Whenever I asked who was hosting, she'd smile a tired smile and say, "Babe, I can barely keep the acronym straight. It's boring HR stuff." If I pushed, she'd add, softer, "You know you can trust me, right?" And at the time, I thought I did. That's the thing about trust. You don't notice it until it's been replaced with hope. The fitness kick arrived like a rebrand. Emily has always cared about health, but this was curated. Overnight, our entryway sprouted 2 new gym bags and an army of black leggings that all looked identical to me but were apparently catastrophically different to her. She joined a boutique studio with a waitlist and a wall of neon slogans about owning your power. Early classes became a ritual, then evening ones to de-stress. She brought home green juices in bottles that cost more than lunch. I told myself it was good for her. Probably was. But when your spouse's schedule suddenly has a new gravitational center that isn't you, it changes the tides in small, petty ways. Dinners that cool on the stove, conversations that never quite find their landing strip. Her wardrobe shifted, too. Not scandalous, just sharper. Tailored blazers, silk shells in colors that made her eyes look colder and more expensive. Heels that lived permanently by the front door like getaway cars. The sample perfume from a coworker that somehow lasted all summer and made our car smell like a hotel lobby. I noticed, filed it away, and told myself that noticing made me small. People are allowed to change. Marriages are supposed to stretch to accommodate growth, right? The phone habits hurt more than I wanted to admit. At home, her phone lived face down on the counter, always on silent, like a sleeping infant that might wake cranky if you breathe too loud. She started using her laptop for messages, because the keyboard is faster. And somehow the screen brightness was always one notch too low to read from the couch. If I crossed the room, she'd casually close the window with a two-finger flick like she was tidying. I told myself it was confidentiality. HR sees everything. HR signs 1,000 NDAs with her eyes. But confidentiality doesn't require you to leave your phone in Do Not Disturb for entire weekends. On social media, we went from anniversary dinner with this guy Red Heart to radio silence. Photos of us together evaporated over a few months, replaced with solo selfies taken in hotel mirrors and boomerangs of champagne flutes clinking just out of frame. When I asked why our lake picture disappeared, my hand on her shoulder, sun flaring behind us, she said, "Oh, I archived it. My grid was chaotic. Like our life had an aesthetic I was throwing off." Even at family gatherings, her attention floated elsewhere. At my parents' barbecue in June, she stood near the fence, thumbs moving, smiling at jokes I didn't get, while my mom asked if work was going okay because I looked tired lately. At her sister's birthday, Emily spent a quarter of the night in the hallway, coordinating a team issue, then returned with that floaty, distant softness that says the conversation continued in her head long after the phone went dark. She laughed at places where no one else was laughing. I watched her mouth shape yes and no to people who weren't in the room. There were practical crumbs. Receipts in the car cup holder from places we'd never been together, wine bars with names that sound like passwords. A duplicate credit card I didn't remember requesting. Lyft notifications pinging her iPad at 1:11 a.m. "Your driver has arrived," to an address across town where we don't have friends. She brushed that off as a glitch, someone else's ride tied to her number by mistake. It happens. It does. But not 3 times. And then there was the morning after one of those Friday dinners. Emily is a light sleeper, but that day she seemed poured into the mattress. When I touched her shoulder, she flinched. Not a cute, sleepy twitch, but a full-body startle like her brain was catching up to where her body had landed. Her first words were, "What time is it?" Her second were, "I have to send a follow-up." No good morning. No you. Just urgency, like the day had been waiting on her to press play. None of this was proof. It was a mosaic of maybes, a collage of plausible deniability. If I'd lined them up and read them out loud, any reasonable person could have explained each one away. People work late. People try new clothes. Phones stay on silent because the world is loud. You learn, living with someone, which hills not to die on. I chose peace a lot. I chose trust even more. Maybe I chose denial most of all. But after the meeting, after watching Emily pull the pin and toss it with a smile, the fragments rearranged themselves. A different image emerged, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't a picture of her with someone else. Not yet. It was a picture of me standing very still, while someone rearranged the furniture of my life around me and called it feng shui. I went back to my office and shut the door. Sat with my hands flat on the desk like I was expecting it to take my pulse. I thought about our first year of marriage, when we had one car and a coffee maker that sputtered like a smoker. We were broke and stupid and happy. If she texted me then, it was always something ordinary. "Get milk? Miss you? Call your mom back, she is worried." Now I was parsing a stranger's question on her lock screen for clues about whether my life was real. I opened my notebook and started a list I titled, "Because I have a cruel sense of humor, signs I ignored." I wrote down the Fridays, the trainings, the silent phone, the disappearing photos, the receipts, the Lyft pings, the gym, the new perfume, the distant laughter she had with her screen. I wrote Jack and circled it twice. I tried to remember if I knew any Jacks from her office. I could think of one finance-tall wedding ring he spins when he's anxious. We'd said maybe 20 words to each other in 3 years. That was enough for suspicion to borrow his face. I told myself I wouldn't spiral. I told myself I'd be methodical. If there was nothing to find, I'd find nothing and swallow the embarrassment of my paranoia. If there was something, well, better to know than to live in the fog. I sat there and listened, to the printer's shriek, to a laugh somewhere down the hall, to my heart knocking on my ribs like a neighbor with bad timing. Then I wrote one last line under the list, a promise more than a plan. No more giving her the benefit of doubts she hasn't earned. That night, I told myself I'd go home, eat something, and try to sleep it off. I think more clearly in the morning. But sleep it off doesn't work when every suspicion you've been stacking like firewood is suddenly dry and waiting for a match. Around 9 o'clock, I remembered I'd left my flash drive at the office. Normally, I'd have shrugged it off and grabbed it in the morning. But for some reason, I couldn't stand the thought of Emily having one more reason to talk about my sloppiness at work. So I grabbed my keys and drove back to headquarters. The building is different after hours. Still, cavernous, and faintly humming with the low whir of machines left on overnight. Most of the lights in our wing were dimmed, just the emergency strips along the hallway casting a dull glow. My footsteps sounded louder than usual on the polished floor. I turned the corner toward my office and stopped dead. Through the wide glass wall of one of the conference rooms, I saw her, Emily, sitting sideways on the lap of a man whose face I'd only ever seen in passing, tall, fit, maybe mid-40s. Jack. I knew it before she even laughed and laid her head against his shoulder. The same Jack whose name had lit up her phone that morning. The company-issued laptop was open on the table, pushed aside like it was in the way. Next to it sat 2 half-filled wine glasses, condensation dripping lazily down the sides. A bottle stood between them, label turned toward me like it was in on the joke. From where I stood, I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I saw the way their fingers interlocked, her thumb brushing his knuckle in that lazy, practiced way that isn't born overnight. I saw the relaxed way his arm curled around her waist. Like this wasn't their first time in this room after hours. She was smiling, not her polite work function smile, not the strained, careful one she'd given me across the conference table that morning. This was softer, unarmored, the kind of smile I used to think was mine. I felt my pulse in my ears. The rational part of my brain whispered that I could knock on the door, step inside, and make them explain themselves right there, under the fluorescent lights. But the part of me that had been collecting her late-night business dinners, the disappearing photos, the silent phone, knew exactly what this was. And if I burst in now, she'd still try to spin it, wrap it in HR-approved language until I doubted what I'd seen. So instead, I reached for my phone. The camera shutter sounded impossibly loud in the empty hallway. I took one photo, then another, then a short video, just long enough to catch her shifting in his lap to face him more fully, her fingers sliding up the back of his neck. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel victorious. I felt cold, hollow in a way that no amount of anger could fill. I stepped back before either of them could notice me, retreating into the darker stretch of the hall until the hum of the vending machine was the loudest sound. I slipped down the side corridor, past the darkened cubicles and out through the back exit. The night air hit me like a shock. I stood in the parking lot for a minute, staring at the lit windows of the building, wondering how many times I'd driven away from here without realizing she was still inside, wondering how many late nights had looked exactly like the scene I'd just captured. By the time I got to my car, my hands had stopped shaking, not because I was calm, but because something in me had settled into a strange, deliberate focus. The way you might feel in the middle of building something, only this was the opposite. I wasn't building. I was preparing to take apart. Driving home, I kept replaying the morning meeting in my head. How she'd sat at the head of the table, all authority and measured concern, and told the room I wasn't performing, that my position might be better suited for someone else. How no one had questioned her. How no one even looked surprised. And now I knew why. The meeting wasn't about my performance. It was about clearing the deck. making space for someone, maybe Jack, maybe someone else she could control. Making sure that when the pieces fell, I'd be standing somewhere she could point to and say, "See? Not my fault." Only now I had more than my gut. I had the kind of evidence no HR spin could neutralize. I parked in our driveway and sat there for a long minute before going inside. From the street, our house looked the same as it always had. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of the pasta she'd left in the fridge for dinner. She wasn't home yet, at least not in the physical sense. I didn't turn on any lights. I just went to my office, sat down, and pulled up the photos on my phone. Each one was sharp, clear. The glass wall of the conference room had turned it into an aquarium of betrayal, and I was the tourist snapping souvenirs. I forwarded the images to a secure folder, then to an email account Emily didn't know I had. If she thought she could paint me as paranoid, these would say otherwise. Somewhere between the third and fourth replay of the video, I decided I wasn't going to confront her tonight. Not yet. I wanted her to walk into whatever came next without knowing how much I'd seen. Because I'd learned something in that hallway. Catching her wasn't the end. It was only the opening move. And if she'd been planning hers for months, I could take a few days to make sure mine landed where it would hurt most. I powered down the phone, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes. In the darkness, the conference room scene flickered again, her laugh, his arm, the untouched laptop off to the side. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a blueprint. And I already knew exactly how I'd use it. I didn't sleep. The ceiling fan chopped the night into quarters while the image of Emily in that glass room kept looping. Her laugh, his hand, the wine, the laptop pushed aside like work was an alibi and desire the real agenda. By 4 a.m., I stopped pretending and brewed coffee that tasted like burned decisions. If she was playing chess, I had to stop reacting like a checkers guy. First rule: don't argue. Escalate. I copied the photos and video into 3 places. An encrypted drive, a cloud account she didn't know about, and a flash drive I taped under my office drawer. Redundancy isn't paranoia. It's survival. Then I drafted a neutral timeline, no adjectives, just dates, times, and facts. The meeting where she cut my pay, the phrase "more suitable candidate," the calendar entry for an internal HR interview, the images from last night, the wine in a conference room. Second rule: pick the right audience. Telling Emily would start a cleanup. Telling the company would start a clock. At 7, I put on the quietest suit I own and drove to headquarters early. The security guard nodded like always. In my office, I printed the timeline and slid it into a manila folder with the kind of care you give fragile things you're about to *p*****. I typed a concise email to the 3 people who could act without Emily's permission: the COO, the general counsel, and the head of our largest client account. Subject: conflict disclosure. HR/employee relationship. I attached the folder contents and hit send on a 5-sentence summary that could be read aloud to a board without anyone choking. I walked the folder to the COO's assistant and asked for 5 minutes before 9. Assistants run the world. If you treat them like it, they let you in. She clocked the legal hold sticker and said, "He'll see you." By 8:12, 3 red receipts landed like a starting G***N. The COO's office is all glass and lake view. He motioned me in, closed the door, and didn't waste time. "Tell me exactly what you saw and exactly what you're alleging." "I'm not alleging," I said. "I'm reporting a conflict of interest and misuse of authority within HR that materially affected my employment. Yesterday my compensation was cut by nearly half during a meeting chaired by my spouse, who then hinted my role would be filled by a more suitable candidate. Hours later, the HR calendar shows her in an internal interview with an employee named Jack. I returned for a flash drive and saw them in a reserved conference room with alcohol, hands intertwined. I have photos and video. He didn't blink. General counsel is joining. 2 minutes later, the GC came in with a legal pad and a face that looked born inside a privilege log. She asked measured questions. Had I confronted Emily? No. Had I shared the images with anyone else? Only them and the client head. Did I believe the compensation decision was influenced by the relationship? I believe the process was compromised, I said. And we have client exposure if this leaks. When the head of our biggest account joined the call, voice crisp, cautious, he said, "We're up for renewal next quarter. If there's instability or misconduct, I need to know our brand isn't at risk." The COO answered with the right bomb. "Swift review, interim safeguards, gratitude for transparency." By 9:30, they'd placed a legal hold on HR communications and suspended Emily pending investigation. The phrase felt antiseptic like sterile gauze. It still bled through. They asked if I'd accept a transfer out of her chain of command into strategic development. Reporting to the COO, effective today, with pay restored at minimum. "I'll accept," I said. "With conditions." The GC's pen paused. "Go on." "Full restoration of salary retroactive to last quarter." Title, Director of Strategic Development, not interim. Written assurance that HR will not influence decisions about my role until the investigation concludes. And I want a Chinese wall between HR and strategic, no shared access to my reviews, compensation, or pipeline. If the wall cracks, I walk with severance and neutrality language. The COO and GC traded the kind of glance that sounds like spreadsheets multiplying. Then the COO nodded. "Draft it. Today." "2 more items," I added. "Our largest client should hear directly from you that governance is intact. I'll lead a rescue pitch this afternoon with a plan that moves their expansion through strategic, not HR. Also, quietly audit conference room access logs and alcohol policies. If compliance finds dust, great. If not, we get ahead of it." The GC almost smiled. Not at me, at the dominoes lining up. They sent me down 1 floor to an empty office with a new badge and a laptop that hadn't learned my passwords yet. I closed the door, exhaled for the first time in hours, and let the quiet flood back. Across the hall, analysts peered into their screens like cartographers. Strategic wasn't glamorous, but it's where maps get drawn before anyone plants flags. I could work with that. At lunch, I texted 2 clients who've always preferred my straight lines to HR's curves. "Coffee today?" I wrote. "I'm leading a new initiative that solves 3 headaches at once." I didn't mention Emily. I didn't have to. People in our industry can smell smoke through concrete. Both replied within minutes. By 2 p.m. I was in a glass huddle room with the client head on video, walking through a deck I'd pulled from thin air and late nights. Onboarding routed through legal and strategic, retention tied to measurable outcomes, a conflict firewall with bricks you could see from space. I didn't sell it with bitterness. I sold it with competence. People buy competence even when they don't like the store. After the call, the client head stayed a beat longer. "Off the record," he said. "We prefer when business isn't entangled." He didn't say who. He didn't need to. "Send the proposal. If governance looks clean, we'll shift the work to your team." Governance. Clean. Shift. 3 words that felt like oxygen. By late afternoon, HR blasted a memo. "As part of an ongoing review, Emily Turner will be on leave. Please direct HR matters to the interim team." No details, no drama. Just absence, boxed and labeled. My inbox filled with coded check-ins from colleagues who've mastered the art of saying nothing while meaning everything. "Saw the memo. You good? Here if you need a sounding board." "Wild morning." I replied with variations of "all good here." I wasn't, but at least the truth had its shoes on. I drove home early, half expecting to find Emily on the couch, rehearsing a script. The house was empty. On the kitchen island, her gym bag sat unzipped, a water bottle sweating a circle into the stone. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the small domestic proof that our life had once been a single thread instead of 2 lines fraying apart. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text. "You blindsided me." Then another. "We should have talked." Then, "Please don't ruin everything." No name, just the bubble. I didn't reply. I forwarded the number to a folder labeled pertinent and put the phone face down. I made dinner, a simple omelet because eggs are honest, and ate standing at the sink like I did in my 20s. I thought about power, the quiet kind you don't announce because it evaporates when you brag. She had tried to recalibrate my worth in a room. Today, I calibrated the room instead. Before bed, I emailed the COO and GC. Thanks for the swift action. Attached is the client deck. I'll send the final proposal tonight. For the record, I will cooperate fully with any investigation and will avoid contact with Emily outside required counsel. Send. Lid down. The fan still carved the air, but it didn't feel like a guillotine anymore. Somewhere between sunrise and now, I remembered a version of myself I liked. One that didn't need her permission to exist. Tomorrow will bring fallout, whispers, and paperwork. But the board is different. And for the first time in months, I'm not waiting to be moved. I'm moving. The day the transfer became official, the badge reader outside Strategic chirped like it was letting me into a different version of my life. New floor, new faces, same coffee that tastes like a corporate compromise. I set my box down, took a breath, and told myself, stop surviving. Start building. The first week, I lived in spreadsheets. I mapped every account Emily used to touch, then cross-referenced who actually moved the needle behind the scenes. HR claimed relationships. Operators built them. I knew the operators. I'd stayed late with them, missed flights with them, shared cab receipts after trade shows where the only thing anyone sold was optimism. I wrote a simple pitch. Governance first, outcomes second, personalities last. People were tired of drama dressed up as culture. They wanted quiet systems that worked. I didn't badmouth Emily. I didn't have to. In our industry, gossip travels faster than documents. A rumor is a courier. Proof is a freight train. The memo about her leave had already done half the work. The images I'd delivered did the rest behind closed doors. By Tuesday, 3 client directors reached out with versions of the same question. If we move our work under Strategic, will it be insulated from HR influence? I gave them a sentence I'd practiced in the mirror. You'll get firewalls you can audit and results you can predict. That seemed to be the only love language anybody trusted. One by one, meetings landed. A medical devices firm we'd almost lost last year. A logistics platform with a founder who hates chaos with his whole heart. A legacy finance group that's allergic to scandal. I met them in glass rooms and coffee shops and once, a quiet booth with a broken lamp that painted everyone a little kinder. I talked less than usual and listened more. I asked where they'd been burned and what a safer version of success looked like. The more they talked, the clearer the same theme became. They weren't choosing me, not really. They were choosing distance from whatever mess HR had become. Inside the company, not everyone cheered the shift. A couple of HR loyalists kept CCing me on long, defensive emails with phrases like optics and historical scope. I answered each with 3 sentences and a link to policy. Nothing starves a fire like lack of oxygen. Meanwhile, the COO started dropping by my office with questions that sounded like compliments. If we centralize onboarding in Strategic, can you promise time to value under 45 days? If I carve out an implementation squad, how fast can you absorb the logistics account? It wasn't flattery. It was a test. Passing it felt like stepping onto dry land. Jack never contacted me. He didn't need to. His name started appearing in the negative space. Meeting invites rescinded. A training he was supposed to co-host suddenly postponed. A partner asking privately if he'd be staffed on their account because our board would prefer otherwise. I didn't engineer those conversations. I just refused to lubricate them with excuses. When asked, I said, we're aligning delivery with risk. Full stop. People understand sentences like that. They don't need footnotes. At home, the quiet felt different. Less emptiness, more room. I cooked a lot, things with steps that reward patience. Slow roasted chicken, beans that need tending, rice you don't lift the lid on until it's ready. The dog-eared notebook where I'd once kept signs I ignored turned into a running list called Things I Can Control. Started small. 8 hours of sleep, sneakers by the door, call dad on Sundays. It grew, mentor 2 analysts, rescue the device's renewal, rebuild the gym habit without turning it into a personality. On the fridge, I taped a single index card. Clarity beats revenge. 2 weeks in, the medical device's client signed the transfer. The email was 4 lines and felt like a sunrise. Their VP wrote, "We're moving under strategic effective immediately. We value your clarity." Clarity. Not charm. Not culture. Not fun to work with. Clarity. I printed that line and taped it inside my desk drawer like a compass. Momentum breeds momentum. The logistics platform followed after their CFO asked a single deadly question in a steering call. Can someone explain why HR is setting delivery milestones? No one could. The head of our legacy finance group finished the hat trick a week later. "We're not punishing anyone," he said on Zoom. "We're just inoculating ourselves." I nodded, said understood, and didn't smile. The less I seemed to enjoy it, the faster people trusted my motives. Around this time, the gossip mutated into something more public. Emily's leave turned into a suspension. Someone leaked a sanitized version to an industry blog that specializes in schadenfreude disguised as trend reporting. They didn't name her, but they didn't have to. Our circles are small. Our calendars betray us. In a town hall, the COO reread the policy on supervisor relationships like scripture. He never looked at me. He didn't need to. Everyone else did. I wish I could say I felt triumphant. Mostly I felt tired in a clean way, the kind that comes from lifting something heavy and setting it down in the right place. There were moments of anger, flashbacks to that glass room, the wine bottle, the laugh I used to think was mine. But the anger didn't have anywhere useful to go, so I stopped feeding it. I poured that energy into checklists and calendars and a reusable slide titled, "How We Decide." And every time my brain reached for rage, I made another small thing better. Jack, for his part, started catching public criticism that sounded like feedback but landed like verdict. In stand-ups, engineers asked if decisions would be free of HR bias now. In a quarterly review, a partner, polite to the point of frostbite, asked why a certain internal mentor had been present for 3 meetings he wasn't invited to. The room was quiet long enough for the air conditioning to answer. Afterward, someone scrubbed Jack's name off a rollout plan and no one put it back. The word unacceptable floated through hallways like a draft. The night the third client shifted, I drove past headquarters out of habit and saw the conference room where everything cracked. It was empty. The chairs were stacked. The table looked smaller. I parked anyway, sat in the lot, and let the memory run until it lost its sting. On the way home, I took the long route by the lake, rolled down the window, and let cold air fill the space where rehearsed speeches used to sit. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like balance returning to a room after a loud guest leaves. People began asking me to speak on governance and trust at internal brown bags. I kept the slides simple. Write the rule, follow the rule, prove you followed the rule. I told a story about a bridge inspector who saves more lives with a checklist than a hero with a headline. I left names out. You'd be amazed how many people will connect the dots you decline to draw. After one session, a junior PM said, "Thank you for not making this about villains." I said, "It's about systems." She nodded like she'd been waiting to hear that. Then came the email from a colleague who used to share a wall with Emily. Subject line, a heads up. The body was a single paragraph. "She's telling people you ambushed her, that you wanted her out to boost your own brand." I stared at the screen a long time, feeling the old furnace kick on. Then I wrote back, "Thanks. I'll let the work speak." And I did. There's only one antidote for narrative warfare. Outcomes so obvious they render the story boring. By quarter's end, our team posted the best retention numbers in 3 years. The COO forwarded the dashboard with a rare smile emoji that looked like it had been cleared by legal. 2 analysts I'd been mentoring were promoted. We shipped a client playbook whose most controversial section was titled "No After-Hours Meetings Without Agenda and Door Open." The joke wrote itself. I didn't tell it. I didn't need to. I still saw Emily once, accidentally, in a lobby downtown. She was with someone from HR I barely know. Her posture had the brittleness of someone bracing for impact that never ends. Our eyes met for half a second. There was a time I would have filled that half second with a paragraph, an apology, a speech, a verdict. Instead, I nodded like you do to a former classmate you can't place. Then the elevator came and the moment passed. My therapist, yes, I finally got one. The company pays for 8 sessions and I stopped pretending I didn't need the first. asked me what I wanted now that the fire had been contained. I said, a smaller life with bigger meaning. He smiled like he'd heard that before, but he didn't laugh at me. We made a short list. Keep building the team, keep my promises, keep my weekends. Call my sister back. Replace the dead plant. Buy better coffee. Text mom a photo when I cook something right. Revenge is loud and short. Recovery is quiet and long. The strike back, if that's what this was, didn't feel like a strike by the end. It felt like alignment, like nudging a picture frame until the horizon stops making you seasick. The people who mattered moved closer. The ones who didn't drifted off like fog. And me? I started sleeping again.